Hey everyone, you ready for this? This deep dive is going to be a little different.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, you know how the metaverse is like the hot new thing everyone's talking about, all this potential for connection and new experiences
Right, like a whole new digital world.
exactly. But you guys sent us some excerpts from this podcast script called The Dark Reality of the Metaverse.
Ooh, that sounds a bit ominous.
Yeah, and it gets pretty intense. It's like they took all the hype about the metaverse and flipped it on its head.
Flipped it
We
how?
were talking about stuff like addiction, serious privacy concerns, and even the potential for exploitation within these virtual worlds.
Huh. I guess it makes sense. Any new technology comes with its own set of risks and challenges.
Totally. But what I found interesting is how this script digs into the motivations behind these shiny new platforms. It's easy to get caught up in the cool factor, but,
Yeah, I know what you mean.
like what are these companies really after?
Well, at the end of the day, they're businesses. Their goal is to make money.
Right? Profit. But how does that translate to potential problems for us, the users?
Well, think about it like this. To make money, they need us to be engaged. The more time we spend plugged into the metaverse, the more opportunities they have to, sell us stuff, show us ads.
I see where you're going with this.
It's like they're creating these incredibly immersive worlds designed to keep us hooked.
So it's like those mobile games that get you with those just one more level rewards or like
Yeah, exactly. Except this time, it's not just a game, it's a whole virtual world.
a world that we might have a hard time logging out of.
Potentially, yeah. And the script actually uses some examples from the past, like, remember World of Warcraft?
Oh yeah, I remember hearing about people spending hours and hours in that game.
Exactly. And Second Life, too. These virtual worlds had some people, neglecting their real lives, spending all their time online. And that was before, we had VR and...
Oh, right, before the technology was as advanced as it is now.
Exactly. So imagine that amplified in a world that's even more immersive and realistic, where the lines between the virtual and the real are even more blurred.
Wow, that's a bit unsettling to think about. And it makes you wonder, what kind of tactics could these companies use to keep us, glued to these platforms?
I mean, we're already seeing some of those tactics in social media, right? The endless scrolling feeds, the notifications that keep popping up.
Yeah, all those little things that make it hard to put your phone down.
And those are designed to exploit our psychology, to trigger our reward centers, to keep us coming back for more. Now imagine those same tactics amplified in the metaverse, where you're not just scrolling, but fully immersed in this engineered world.
Okay, this whole addiction thing is already worrying enough, but then this source throws another curveball at us. Privacy. They're saying these companies could know basically everything about us in the metaverse, not just, what we click on or what we search for.
Yeah, the level of data collection they're talking about is pretty mind-blowing. We're talking about monitoring your every move, your gestures, even your eye movements.
Wait, our eye movements, what do you mean?
Like, they could track exactly where you look, what grabs your attention, and for how long. They could know what you're interested in, even if you don't consciously click on anything.
Okay, that is kind of creepy. And, given some companies' track records with data privacy, that's a bit terrifying, right? Like, what could they actually do with all that information besides, show us more targeted ads?
Well, the ads are a big part of it, but they could get even more personalized, I guess is the word. Imagine walking through a virtual store and suddenly you're surrounded by ads for like comfort food and stress relief products because the system knows you're feeling down.
So they'd be using our emotions against us, basically.
In a way, yeah. But beyond advertising, there's the whole issue of data security. All this sensitive data, including biometric data like your eye movements and potentially even your emotional responses, becomes a prime target for hackers.
Right, and if that data falls into the wrong hands, the consequences could be, well, pretty disastrous. So far we've got the potential for addiction, a complete loss of privacy. Is there anything positive about this metaverse everyone's talking about?
I mean, the source does acknowledge the potential for new opportunities, especially when it comes to, like, the economy. People are buying virtual land, selling NFTs, even making a living in these virtual worlds. It's like a digital gold rush.
Yeah, I've heard about that. But hold on, didn't we already see this with platforms like Roblox? Where, like, young creators were generating tons of content and barely getting paid while the company was making a fortune.
You're hitting the nail on the head. That's one of the big concerns this source raises. They're warning that the metaverse could become and I'm quoting here, a digital sweatshop if we don't establish clear rules and protections for workers.
So maybe this gold rush isn't all it's cracked up to be. And with all this time spent online, what about the impact on our mental health? Like, we already know social media is linked to anxiety and depression. Could the metaverse make things worse?
It's a valid concern. The script talks about the pressure to create these idealized virtual versions of ourselves, which could lead to, even more body image issues and dissatisfaction with real life.
Yeah, it's like everyone's trying to be the most popular, have the coolest avatar, live in the best virtual house. It's like just another layer of pressure to be perfect.
Exactly. And that pressure can be really damaging, especially for young people who are still developing their sense of self.
And what about the whole idea of connection? Isn't the metaverse supposed to bring people together?
That's the irony, right? This source actually suggests that despite the illusion of connection, the metaverse could actually make people more isolated.
More isolated? How could that be?
Well, think about it. We might start spending more and more time interacting with our avatars, these digital versions of ourselves, than with actual real people.
So we'd be neglecting our real-world relationships in favor of these virtual ones.
Potentially, yeah. And the source kind of compares it to using social media as a crutch, instead of dealing with tough stuff in real life.
You just escape into this perfect virtual world.
Right, where everything's, fun and exciting and there are no problems. But that's not real life.
Okay, so we've got potential addiction, total privacy nightmare, this questionable economic system, and now maybe even a mental health crisis brewing. Anything else this source wants us to worry about?
They do save what they think is the most crucial point for last.
Okay, lay it.
Foreign control. Who's really going to be in charge of this virtual world?
That's a good question. I mean, we're not talking about some public park here. The metaverse is being built by
powerful corporations, companies like Meta, Microsoft, Apple, the big players.
Right. So what happens when they have the power to, shape our virtual experiences?
That's where things get a bit, potentially scary. The source is basically saying these companies could end up being the ultimate gatekeepers.
Gatekeepers, how?
They could control what we see, what we do, who gets to participate. It's their world, after all.
So if they don't like what you're saying or doing, they could just ban you from the metaverse.
It might sound extreme, but think about it. We've already seen social media companies censor content and ban users, right? For violating their terms of service or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
So imagine that same power dynamic, but in a fully immersive world that's becoming more and more intertwined with our actual lives.
That is a lot of power for a few companies to have.
Yeah.
And what about governments? Could they get involved in controlling the metaverse too?
The script definitely brings that up as a possibility, especially, governments that already have a history of censorship and surveillance.
Right, they might be tempted to use the metaverse to keep tabs on people, control what information they see. It's like something out of a dystopian novel.
It might sound far-fetched, but it's a possibility we can't ignore. This source is really urging us to be careful, to think critically about who's controlling these platforms and what their agenda might be.
So after all this talk about the dark side, is there any hope for the metaverse? Is it doomed to become this dystopian nightmare?
I wouldn't say it's doomed just yet. The point of all this isn't to scare people away from the metaverse.
So then what is the point?
It's more about raising awareness, getting people to think about the potential risks and challenges before it's too late.
Okay, so it's like a warning, a heads up, so we don't repeat the same mistakes we made with social media.
Exactly. It's like we're at a crossroads. We've got this amazing new technology with incredible potential, but it also comes with some serious baggage.
So we have a choice to make. How do we want this technology to evolve?
Right. And it's not just up to the companies building it, it's up to all of us.
So it's not about rejecting the metaverse altogether, but more about being aware of the potential downsides and demanding better from the companies creating it.
Yeah, exactly. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We can't just sit back and assume everything will work out on its own.
We need to ask tough questions, hold these companies accountable, push for more transparency, make sure they're prioritizing things like user safety and privacy and all that.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individual actions, it's about collective action too.
Working together to make sure the metaverse evolves in a positive direction.
That's the idea. The source is really emphasizing that we, the users, have a huge role to play in shaping this new digital world.
So it's not just about passively consuming the metaverse,
Yeah.
but about actually participating in its creation and making sure it reflects our values.
Right. And that brings us back to the listener. What role do you want to play in shaping the future of the metaverse? What kind of world do you want to be a part of creating?
It's a big question. And this deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about. We started with all this excitement about the metaverse, then explored all these potential downsides, and now we're left with this challenge. How do we ensure that this technology lives up to its promise while avoiding the pitfalls?
It's like we've been given a glimpse into the future, both the good and the bad. And now it's up to us to decide which path we want to take.
So where do we even begin? It all feels kind of overwhelming, to be honest. Like, what can one person really do to influence something as big as the metaverse?
It starts with, just being aware of the issues.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what we're doing here. You sent us this material, we're having this conversation, we're thinking critically about it. That's the first step.
Okay, awareness is key. But what comes after that? What can people actually do to make sure the metaverse doesn't, turn into some dystopian nightmare?
Well, the source actually has some pretty practical suggestions. They talk a lot about the importance of being informed consumers, like reading articles and following the news and really engaging in those conversations about the ethical implications of this technology.
Right, because the more we know, the better equipped we'll be to make good decisions.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to demand transparency from these companies. Ask questions about data privacy policies and content moderation practices and the algorithms they use, all that stuff.
So it's kind of like we're becoming digital citizens in this new virtual world.
That's a great way to put it. And just like in the real world, we have a right to know how things work, to have a say in how these platforms are governed.
And we can use our voices to advocate for change.
Exactly. You can support organizations that are fighting for a more ethical and responsible metaverse. You can reach out to policymakers, advocate for legislation that protects user privacy, and promotes fair labor practices within these virtual spaces. All of that stuff matters.
So it's not just about individual actions, but collective action too.
Exactly. This source is really emphasizing that this is a collective responsibility. We have to work together to shape the future of the metaverse. It's not something that's just going to happen to us. It's something that we're all creating together.
Through our choices, our actions, and our voices.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most important takeaways from this whole conversation.
This whole deep dive has really been eye-opening. I mean, we started with all the exciting possibilities of the metaverse and ended up talking about some really deep ethical and societal questions.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing to think about how this technology could reshape our world.
And it really highlights how important it is to have these conversations now before it's too late.
Exactly. The metaverse is still evolving. We have an opportunity to get things right this time.
To learn from the mistakes we made with social media and build something better.
Right. We don't have to just accept whatever these companies throw at us. We have a choice. We have a voice.
And we have a responsibility to use them.
Exactly.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive. We went from the shiny surface of the metaverse to, some pretty dark corners. But ultimately, I feel like we ended on a note of hope. This future isn't set in stone. We can still shape it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's up to all of us to decide what kind of world we want to create.
So to sum it all up for our listeners, we learned that the metaverse offers incredible possibilities, but also some serious potential downsides. We talked about the risk of addiction, the erosion of privacy, the potential for exploitation, the impact on our mental health, and the whole question of who controls this technology.
But we also explored some of the things we can do to make sure the metaverse evolves in a positive direction. Things like staying informed, demanding transparency, using our voices, and working together to advocate for a more ethical and equitable virtual world.
It's been a wild ride, exploring the dark side of the metaverse.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we did it. It's important to have these tough conversations.
I agree. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that the future of this technology is still being written. We're not just passive observers. We all have a role to play in shaping its destiny.
The metaverse is a reflection of us, its creators. It's up to each and every one of us to decide what kind of world we want to build. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, the future is in our hands.